sit down. I think
you were in the right spot. I was clearly.
I'm in good company. Good morning. I'm Emily Goligoski. Good morning.
Too much fun.
I'm Emily Goligoski. I lead the research practice here at Charter. As we've written, individuals in historically marginalized groups are often disenfranchised and devalued during moments of economic and societal transition. Amid the promise of using generative AI in our workplaces, and many people we've spoken to who are using these tools in their jobs today, in manufacturing, service, and knowledge work, say that they have seen upside in time savings, work quality, and lower stress. Yet we are concerned about the people who are least likely to benefit. Based on both historic precedent and new research data, we're especially thinking about ways that employers can support and showcase AI adoption by women employees and hourly workers, individuals over 55, and BIPOC individuals. Based on a study that Charter has just undertaken to learn how workers themselves want to be developed in their careers, that's new research we're going to discuss this afternoon at 1:15 Eastern Time, we find concerning but addressable gaps in AI experimentation and adoption. Most striking to me are fears about employment precarity. We find that over half of Black respondents we surveyed expressed concern about AI replacing them in their roles, 14 percentage points higher than their white colleagues, despite already using generative AI tools more in their roles. This is work we're going to be talking about in more detail. And concerns about job loss, alongside simultaneous adoption and excitement, suggest that this is a really vital and opportune moment for employers to involve workers of all backgrounds in their AI planning, communication, and training. As we share frameworks to ensure that more workers will see benefits from AI in their roles, we've invited 3 experts to share promoted practices that they see for using AI fairly and ethically. They are, from left, Brian Hancock, a partner at McKinsey & Company and author of the book Power to the Middle. Alex Butter-Shapiro, Chief People Officer of Jasper, an AI company for marketing teams, an AI company for enterprise marketing teams. And Julia Stojkovic, a technologist and director of the NYU Center for Responsible AI. I've asked our guests today to share one concrete problem, either something already realized or on the immediate horizon, that they see as most in need of immediate addressing if workers are to see real benefit from using these technologies as opposed to being disenfranchised by them. So I've asked them to take all their perspectives, all of the body of research and literature in this space, and point out one pressing challenge ahead. And I'm going to start with Julia.
All right, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. So I'm a professor of computer science and of data science at NYU, first and foremost, and I also direct our Center for Responsible AI, where the goal is to make responsible AI and AI synonymous, hopefully in the present or, at the very least in a not too distant future. And when we utter this term responsible AI, everybody then starts thinking to what does this responsibility, to what is it attributed or to whom, right? And so I feel very strongly about making sure that responsible AI is about people having the responsibility and being able to carry that responsibility for the way in which AI is designed, developed, and used, right? So to me, the most pressing problem in this environment right now is giving control back to people who are using AI and who are being impacted by AI to decide whether AI should even be used in the first place in a particular context. Is there a real business problem or social problem that we hope that AI will solve or help us solve? If not, we shouldn't be using it, right? We shouldn't just be using something because it's here, because there is no free lunch. We are, having an environmental impact by deploying these tools. We are contributing very often to decisions that we cannot ourselves understand or scrutinize or control. So we need to be very careful that we as people keep that responsibility, keep that agency and control. And I'm happy to elaborate on this through the remainder of the panel, but let me pass over to the next speaker.
Well, Julia, I'm sure we're going to find ways to disagree in the later parts of this panel, but I guess mine builds on yours, if that's okay for now.
That's fine.
I have a room of people here who, like me, think a lot about how people work, how they work most effectively, and then what our role is as people leaders in helping that happen. And I think for me, that same problem, the lack of understanding of an individual's agency in using the tool, is a more corporate challenge around what we actually think the adoption of this technology should be in our workplace, and how we as people leaders are really grounding that in the business problem we're trying to solve, and then thinking through, just like we would with anything, how we drive the change we want in the organization, where the training gaps are, what acceptable use is, what policies and processes we need to put in place. So yeah, I think people are sort of overestimating that role of the technology, and therefore undervaluing the role that we play in really determining what work we want to be doing, what work we want our teams to be doing, and what work we want to be delegating.
I'll take a little bit of a different angle here. I mean, when we talk about, how do we help the people who may be most afraid, people in marginalized communities, others, about what's happening with AI, I think part of what we can do is provide better career guidance, better coaching, better understanding of, here's the underlying skills you have today, here's how the world of work is evolving, and here's how we can better connect you to what opportunities might be in the future. And in doing that, you can actually use generative AI to help on that. If you've got a good understanding of where somebody's starting point is, generative AI can help translate other jobs into a language somebody might understand. So from a technical to a non-technical, might be able to suggest learning, career paths that there's been evidence in the past, but provide some real tactical guidance to folks that are most affected. Is I think if people don't know where to go, don't know what the impact is really going to be to them and what they can do about it, it creates more fear, more anxiety. And I think the more that we can create clear views of career paths and clear views of paths to opportunity, I think the better it'll be.
My sense is also, Brian, on that point, asking individuals about their career goals for the year ahead, and then contextualizing that with new technologies they might be using is important.
Absolutely.
I want to come back to something that Julie was starting to speak about, which is validity and really interrogating both the source data and the tools that we're using. As we think about a group of talent leaders and HR professionals, I'm curious, things you would encourage them to be asking as they are considering new vendors that they might be employing in their workforces.
Thank you for this question. So I've done quite a bit of work on analyzing how technology is used in hiring, so in sourcing and screening candidates. And my colleagues and I have been doing this work before generative AI became all the rage. And I don't think that any of the questions and any of the risks really change all that much with the advent of generative AI. There's a lot more hype, so in that sense, there's a lot more risk. But in general, technology, it's a tool, right? And so when we're using technology, we need to make sure that we have a clearly articulated goal. What do we want this technology to do for us? What do we want it to help improve? Is it efficiency? How do we measure efficiency? Is it our ability to find candidates who are better suited for the job? If so, how can we quantify that? And how can we then check down the road, or even before we deploy these tools, that in fact these goals for the technology are met, right? So I think that it's very important to keep in mind that technology, AI, it's a bunch of engineering artifacts. And you should never take someone's word for granted that they work. And so for any of us who have done any software development, we know that unless you test something, it doesn't work, right? And this is going to be the case with anything else in engineering. If somebody hands you a car and says, please drive it, believe me, it runs fine, but I can't really tell you how I tested it. Would you be comfortable getting behind the wheel of that car? No, right? So with the use of technology in your space, and for example, in hiring and employment, right? Of course, somebody who doesn't get screened into be called in for a job interview, let's say, they are not harmed to the same extent as somebody getting hit by a car as a pedestrian, but it's also death by 1,000 cuts, right? I mean, we're going to be experiencing other types of harms to individuals, to groups, to your organizations as well, that unless we can really be certain that these tools are helping us deal with these harms and actually do something positive, I think we should be really very cautious in using them.
Alex, you have shared that you recently were considering a job shift, and you have accepted the role of CHRO at Jasper AI. Can you talk to us as both a recent candidate yourself, as a practitioner in the HR space, and as someone who represents enterprise AI, some of the guidance that you offer to your fellow practitioners?
Yeah. So Charter was a key kind of partner to me as I was thinking about what I wanted to do next. So Emily is being kind. I'm about 4 months in, and a huge kind of thesis around my joining Jasper after 7 years in health tech was this feeling that the future of work had been happening at me for the last 3.5 years. And I felt like I was just on the receiving end, I'm sure everyone here, like on the receiving end of new thing after new thing. And I wanted to feel in the driver's seat. I wanted to feel like I understood what was going on, and I understood it well enough to think through how to use it better. And so coming in, you know, as Jasper's sort of in the middle of this huge transition into going really deep in the enterprise space, I've thought a lot about the kind of corporate persona of the CHRO as an enterprise buyer, and what story do we need to tell to me on the other side of the table to help people feel comfortable with the tool adoption. And that's where you might ground things in the human, but we're all human resources people enough to know that we support humans through lots of good and bad decision making. And so for me, a lot of what I started asking a lot of questions around was sort of the acceptable use process, and how did we think about equipping the teams that may or may not have ever, I mean, unless they're at Microsoft, in which that sounded like a nice fantasy world that we could be in 2 years, they may never have really grappled with how do I use this technology. And as a part of that, I think really digging into, maybe similar to like the bring your own device transition, really digging into what do I want people to do if they misuse this technology? What do I want to tell people at the beginning of when they're starting to use this technology versus what is my internal process for reporting things? I mean, if you grapple with the technology, you understand it's built on the human world, and the human world is a deeply flawed world. And so the technology itself is going to sometimes produce deeply flawed and concerning results. And you need to determine for your organization, what do I want people to do about that? Am I trusting a vendor who takes this seriously? What will they do if people are misusing my technology? What's their process for misuse of technology? What is the training that this vendor is going to provide my organization to understand what we expect of that? And so really grounding yourself in that kind of enterprise adoption, and it's been fun for me to get to sit on both sides of the table there.
That topic of workforce training is something that I want to come back to with Brian. Talk to us a little bit about learning and development best practices, especially as it relates to training people with the full awareness that there is bias in these tools that very often are furthered, and that they're imperfect, as Alex was mentioning.
I think one of the things in particular, as you get to generative AI, you've created an easier to use interface for people to engage with a range of technologies, as Julia said, have existed for a while, with some real underlying bias and challenges to it. So as you put an easy to use technology in the hands of tens, dozens, hundreds of people, you need to make sure that they understand the risks and limitations. If they're using a large language model to access some predictive AI in hiring, they need to understand, hey, what are the underlying risks that are there? They need to understand if they are creating new content, if they're creating the first draft of a legal brief, hey, they need to understand it is good, but here's what hallucination looks like, or the other pieces. And so in particular, because some of these interfaces are so easy to use, we need to make sure that it's not just a small group of technologists that understand the risks, but the organization more broadly understands both the promise and the risks of some of these new technologies.
If I may just add to that, technologists don't understand the risks. Even the companies that produce these tools, they don't understand the risks, and they don't want you to worry about them, because what they want is to sell these tools to you. And this is why there is this narrative that the tools hallucinate. They don't hallucinate, they make mistakes, right? They are not people, they're not conscious. They don't have a mind, right? So when we use these terms, and this is our point of disagreement, that I feel really strongly that there should be disagreement on a panel, otherwise it's dull, right? I would be very careful to really kind of steer clear of anthropomorphizing these tools, right? And the choice to make the conversation with a generative AI, like a ChatGPT, sound like there is a human on the other end of the line, this is deliberate on the part of the vendors, right? Because we as humans, we are somehow conditioned to think that language represents culture. And therefore, if something exhibits human language, it must also have culture, but that's not true, right? So be very, very careful about this, please.
What else? I'm going to offer this up to Brian and to Alex. Also, what would you like to debunk or reframe in the way that we are talking about AI usage in this moment? And I'm really mindful that we may be in something of a hype cycle around generative AI as more of us start experimenting with it. And yet, many of the companies we have supported as consumers have been using automation and surveillance technologies with their own workforces for years.
Terrible.
I mean, if I were to if I were to say it is not necessary that these technologies have a negative impact on any particular population. Going back to what Julia said, hey, these technologies do what, in some ways, people point it to do and solve the problems that people want it to solve. So if we want to solve diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we want to solve the impacts of these technologies in those groups, let's have as a priority when we're designing workflows or when we're designing what we're doing, that it's actually inclusive. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing that some of the aids, the co-pilots, the assistants in generative AI, it helps new joiners the most. And so if we've got a technology that could help access more jobs to more people, hey, let's deliberately then say, hey, if that's possible, let's figure out what the hiring needs to be. Let's figure out what the training needs to be to connect those folks to opportunity. It's not predetermined that we're eliminating a role within an organization. There are ways that if we put diversity at the forefront, for example, that we can actually have solutions that solve for diversity. And so what I'd encourage us to do is think through what do we really want to solve, and then think through how we can solve it.
Yeah, I think Julia doesn't totally trust the technology. I don't always totally trust humans. Like I want to work backwards from how we think work should look, and then think about how we get there, how we as individuals use the capabilities that we've built. This is not like to your point about not anthropomorphizing. This is not something that happened. These are capabilities that we're building to think through how to make work look different. I want us to work backwards from that future world and say, what is the uniquely human part that I want to own? What is the part that I don't actually need to own and probably at this stage don't even want to own? And then how do I build that? How do I take the agency and the ownership to build that within sort of a broader set of what work can look like? And I think that right now the hype cycle has taken that away as if we don't get to design what we want our company and our environments to look like anymore.
I like what Brian said about this space is not predetermined, that there is absolutely space to act. In about 15 seconds, not to be too much of a cable TV news host, one possible solution as we look ahead that you are enthusiastic about or want us to be talking about more. Julia.
Education and giving people at your organization an ability and a safe space to ask questions. Why are we using this tool? How will we know whether it works? Right? How will we measure success? Are we prepared to not use it if we can't find a successful use case?
Alex?
Yeah, starting by really piloting really specific and focused use cases and letting people become evangelists to their team members about what opportunities they see, I think that helps break down a lot of the barriers.
And I'm most excited about one particular use case, and that is a career co-pilot that helps anyone, regardless of their background, understand what they can do to leverage their skills to get the next set of opportunities. So they're not reliant on one career coach or one manager who may or may not know, but they have better insight and better ways of finding opportunities for them in the future.
Please join me in thanking these three